I was sitting on my front porch in Cedar Rapids, Iowa, watching the morning sun burn off the last of the autumn fog when I saw Deborah Winters marching down Maple Street with her phone pressed against her ear and that unmistakable look of righteous indignation plastered across her face. My coffee was still steaming in my hand, and I had maybe 20 minutes before my delivery truck was supposed to arrive with the cord of seasoned oak I had promised to the Hendersons 3 streets over. Deborah was our Homeowners Association president, a title she wielded like a scepter, and something told me this peaceful Saturday morning was about to go sideways. I had moved to the Riverside Meadows subdivision about 8 months ago, purchasing a modest 2-story colonial on a quiet cul-de-sac after my forestry business really started taking off. My name is Wesley Forester, and I run a fully licensed forestry operation that specializes in sustainable lumber harvesting, firewood processing, and land management services across eastern Iowa. The business had grown from a one-man operation with a beat-up pickup truck to a legitimate enterprise with proper licensing, insurance, commercial vehicles, and even 3 employees. I worked mostly out in rural areas, managing woodlots for farmers and processing fallen trees after storms. But I lived here in Cedar Rapids because my girlfriend worked at the hospital downtown, and the schools were good for when we eventually had kids. The neighborhood seemed nice enough when I bought the place. Tree-lined streets, well-maintained homes, families walking their dogs in the evening. Sure, there was a homeowners association, but the previous owner assured me they were reasonable. He failed to mention Deborah. She materialized at the end of my driveway before I could even set down my coffee mug. Mid-50s, blonde hair sprayed into submission, wearing a lavender cardigan despite the fact that it was 60 degrees outside, and clutching a leather-bound copy of the HOA bylaws like it was a religious text. "Wesley," she said, her voice dripping with forced politeness. "I received a very concerning call this morning from Martha Keegan. She says you told her you were expecting a commercial delivery vehicle today. A truck." I took a slow sip of my coffee, already feeling my jaw tighten. "Morning, Deborah. Yeah, I have a firewood delivery coming. Oak, actually. Good stuff." Her expression shifted from fake pleasant to genuinely horrified. "A commercial vehicle, in a residential neighborhood, on a Saturday morning when families are trying to enjoy their weekend. It's a truck delivering firewood. People get deliveries all the time. The Simmons got a whole pallet of landscaping stone last month. That was a commercial truck." "That was different," Deborah said, waving her hand dismissively. "That was for home improvement. This is you running a business out of your home, which is strictly prohibited under Section 12.4 of our community guidelines." I set my coffee down on the porch railing and stood up. I am 6'2" and spent most of my working hours hauling logs and splitting wood, so I have the kind of build that usually makes people think twice about starting confrontations. Deborah did not even blink. "I am not running a business out of my home," I said, keeping my voice level. "My business operates out of a commercial property on Industrial Park Road. I have an office, a warehouse, equipment storage, everything proper and legal. This is just a personal delivery. I ordered firewood for my own fireplace." "From your own company," she said triumphantly, like she had just solved a murder mystery. "Yes, from my own company. Is there a rule against that?" She flipped open the bylaws to a page marked with a pink sticky note. "Section 12.4 clearly states that no commercial activities may be conducted on residential properties. No business vehicles may be parked in driveways or on streets overnight. No signage advertising commercial services. No storage of commercial equipment or inventory." This is not commercial activity. This is me getting firewood delivered to my house. The truck is not staying. There is no signage. There is no equipment. The truck itself is a commercial vehicle, which makes this a violation. I could feel my patience wearing thin. Deborah, by that logic, every Amazon delivery, every FedEx truck, every pizza delivery guy is violating the HOA rules. Those are all commercial vehicles. Those are delivery services, not business operations. This is also a delivery service. It is delivering firewood to me, a resident, for personal use. She snapped the bylaws shut. I have already called the police to report a commercial vehicle violation and possible illegal business operations in a residential zone. They should be here shortly. My stomach dropped. You called the cops on a firewood delivery. I am simply ensuring that our community standards are maintained. If you are not doing anything wrong, you have nothing to worry about. She turned on her heel and marched back toward her house, which was positioned at the neighborhood entrance like a guard tower. I stood there for a moment, stunned by the sheer pettiness of it all. Then I pulled out my phone and called my driver, Miguel, who was probably 15 minutes out. "Hey, boss," he answered over the rumble of the diesel engine. "Miguel, slight situation. The HOA president called the cops because apparently a firewood delivery is a criminal offense now, just giving you a heads up." There was a pause, then a low chuckle. "Man, suburbia is wild. You want me to turn around? No, come on through. I paid for that wood and I am not letting Deborah Winters turn this into some kind of power trip victory. Just be prepared for potential police presence." "Copy that. See you in 10. I went inside and grabbed my business license, my commercial vehicle registration documents, my Iowa Forestry operation permits, and my liability insurance certificates. If Deborah wanted to make this official, I would show her just how legitimate my operation was. My girlfriend, Tessa Jenkins, came downstairs in her scrubs getting ready for her hospital shift. She took one look at my face and sighed. "What did Deborah do now?" called the cops on my firewood delivery. "Jesus Christ, that woman needs a hobby. She has a hobby. It is ruining everyone's day." Tessa poured herself coffee and kissed my cheek. "Try not to get arrested. I have a 12-hour shift and I cannot bail you out until tonight." "Gee, thanks for the support," she grinned. "You know I love you. Just maybe do not antagonize the police when they show up." "I would never." "You absolutely would." She was not wrong. I had a bit of a problem with authority figures who abused their power, and Deborah had been pushing buttons since I moved in. First it was my lawn being a quarter-inch too tall. Then it was my trash cans being visible from the street for 15 minutes after pickup. Then it was my truck being parked in my own driveway, because apparently it was too large and created an eyesore. Never mind that Jeff Harrison 3 doors down had a boat on a trailer that took up half his driveway and overhung into the street. That was fine. That was recreational. My work truck was offensive. Tessa left for her shift, and I sat back down on the porch to wait. True to Miguel's estimate, the delivery truck rumbled into view about 8 minutes later. It was a flatbed with tall side rails, loaded with neatly stacked cords of split oak. The truck had my company logo on the door, Forester Forestry and Land Management, along with my business phone number and license information. It was professional, well-maintained, and completely legal. Miguel pulled up to the curb in front of my house and hopped out. He was a stocky guy in his 30s, former Marine, reliable as sunrise. "Where do you want it, boss?" Side of the house, next to the garage. "Let me give you a hand." We were just starting to unload the wood when a Cedar Rapids Police Department cruiser pulled onto the street. The officer took his time getting out, surveying the scene with the practiced eye of someone who had responded to way too many ridiculous HOA complaints. He was maybe 40, built like he actually spent time in the gym, with dark hair graying at the temples. His nameplate read Officer Patterson. "Morning," he called out as he approached. "I got a call about a commercial vehicle violation." I wiped my hands on my jeans and walked over. "Morning, officer. That would be our lovely HOA president making trouble. I am Wesley Forester. This is my employee, Miguel. We are delivering firewood to my house." Officer Patterson looked at the truck, then at the wood, then at me. "Your house?" "Yes, sir. And this is your company?" "Yes, sir. Forester Forestry and Land Management." Fully licensed forestry business operating out of a commercial facility on Industrial Park Road. "I have all my paperwork if you want to see it." He nodded slowly. "The complaint was that you are running illegal commercial operations out of a residential property." "I am not. This is personal firewood delivery. I own the company, so I ordered wood from my own inventory for my home fireplace. The business itself operates entirely out of our commercial location. No business activity happens here." Officer Patterson walked around the truck, checking the plates and the condition of the vehicle. Everything was current and legal. He looked at the wood, which was clearly just firewood, neatly split and stacked. "You said you have your business license. Right here." I handed him the folder I had prepared. He flipped through it, checking the Iowa Department of Natural Resources Forestry Operation Permit, the state business license, the commercial vehicle registration, the insurance certificates. Everything was in order. "This all looks legitimate," he said, handing the folder back. "Licensed forestry operation, commercial address on file, proper permits. You are not conducting business at this residence?" "No, sir. I live here. The business is elsewhere. This is just like any other home delivery." "But you own the company?" "Yes, sir." "So technically you are delivering to yourself?" "Technically, yes, but it is still just a delivery. The wood was cut and processed at our facility, transported here in a commercial vehicle, and will be unloaded for personal use. No different than if I ordered it from any other firewood company, except I happen to own this one." Officer Patterson rubbed his chin, clearly trying to figure out if there was any actual violation here. "And the HOA has a problem with this because Deborah Winters has a problem with me in general, and she is using any excuse she can find to make my life difficult." As if summoned by her name, Deborah came striding back down the street with two other women in tow. I recognized them as Martha Keegan and Susan Delacroix, two of her loyal HOA board members. The three of them looked like they were heading to a PTA meeting to get someone fired. "Officer, thank goodness you are here," Deborah said breathlessly. "This man has been violating our community standards for months. He parks commercial vehicles in his driveway. He conducts business operations in a residential zone. And now he has this massive truck blocking the street." Officer Patterson turned to face her. "Madam, I have reviewed Mr. Forester's business documentation. He runs a fully licensed forestry operation with all proper permits and insurance. This vehicle is legally registered and currently making a personal delivery to his residence. There is no violation here." Deborah's face flushed red. "But he owns the company. He is obviously using his home for business purposes. Owning a business does not mean you are running it from your home. Mr. Forester has a commercial facility where his business operates. This is simply a delivery, no different than any other service vehicle coming to a residence. But the HOA rules clearly state that no commercial vehicles may be parked in the neighborhood. The truck is not parked, madam. It is making a delivery. It will leave as soon as the delivery is complete. There is no ordinance violation, no zoning violation, and no reason for police involvement here. Martha Keegan spoke up, her voice shrill. What about the noise? That truck is incredibly loud. It is disturbing the peace. Officer Patterson looked at his watch. It is 9:30 on a Saturday morning, well within acceptable hours for deliveries and construction noise. Unless the vehicle is violating noise ordinances with modified exhaust or something similar, there is no violation. This is unacceptable, Deborah sputtered. We have rules in this community for a reason. We cannot have people just doing whatever they want. Madam, with all due respect, Mr. Forester is not violating any rules. He is receiving a legal delivery at his residence. If your HOA has an issue with that, it is a civil matter between you and him, not a police matter. I could see Deborah's jaw working as she tried to come up with another angle. Susan Delacroix jumped in. What about the safety issue? That wood could have termites or other pests. That is a health hazard for the entire neighborhood. Miguel, who had been quietly listening to this whole exchange while leaning against the truck, let out a short laugh. Lady, this is kiln-dried oak. There are no pests. We process everything according to state forestry standards. Officer Patterson nodded. If there were a legitimate pest concern, you would need to contact the county health department, not the police. And you would need evidence of an actual infestation, not speculation. Deborah was clearly losing this battle, and her expression was growing more desperate. There must be something. He cannot just do this. Actually, he can, Officer Patterson said, his patience clearly wearing thin. Now, if you will excuse me, I have actual emergencies to respond to. Mr. Forester, you are free to complete your delivery. Ladies, have a good morning. He nodded to me, walked back to his cruiser, and drove off. The three women stood there for a moment, looking like they had just watched their team lose the Super Bowl. Then Deborah pointed a finger at me. This is not over, Wesley. I will be reviewing every single bylaw and regulation. If you are violating anything, I will find it. You do that, Deborah. In the meantime, I am going to stack my firewood. They left in a huff, and Miguel and I got back to work. It took about 40 minutes to unload the entire cord and stack it neatly against the side of my garage. Miguel refused my offer to pay him extra for dealing with the drama. Man, that was the most entertainment I have had all week, he said, climbing back into the truck. Your HOA president is something else. Tell me about it. You want me to make a note in the system about this? In case she tries something else. Yeah, good idea. Document everything. Date, time, what happened, police involvement, all of it. You got it, boss. See you Monday. He drove off, and I stood there looking at my newly delivered firewood, feeling both satisfied and irritated. I had won this round, but I knew Deborah. She was not the type to let things go. I spent the rest of the afternoon doing yard work, half expecting her to come back with some new complaint. Around 3 o'clock, my neighbor from across the street, Gary Chen, wandered over with his dog. Hey, Wesley, I saw the excitement this morning. Deborah at it again, called the cops on my firewood delivery. Gary shook his head. That woman is unbelievable. You know she tried to fine me last month because my kid's basketball hoop was 6 inches into the setback zone. 6 inches. I had to pull out the property survey and prove she was wrong. Why is she like this? Control issues, I think. She has been HOA president for 7 years. Nobody else wants the job, so she just keeps getting re-elected by default. And the longer she is in power, the worse she gets. There has to be something we can do. Gary shrugged. You could run against her in the next election. That is in, 4 months? I have been here less than a year. Nobody would vote for me. You would be surprised. A lot of people are sick of her. They are just too afraid to speak up because she will make their lives miserable. She is already making my life miserable. Then you have nothing to lose. He had a point. I had been trying to keep my head down and avoid conflict, but that strategy clearly was not working. Maybe it was time to take a more proactive approach. That evening, Tessa came home exhausted from her shift and found me at the kitchen table with my laptop, reading through the entire Riverside Meadows HOA bylaws document. It was 63 pages of single-spaced rules covering everything from lawn height to roof colors to holiday decoration restrictions. Please tell me you are not becoming one of those people who gets obsessed with HOA politics, she said, dropping into the chair across from me. Deborah called the cops on me this morning. I need to understand exactly what authority she actually has and where the boundaries are. And most of this is unenforceable garbage. Half these rules violate Iowa property law. The other half are so vaguely worded that you could interpret them however you want. She is basically making it up as she goes. Tessa grabbed my laptop and closed it. You are not going to out-rules lawyer the rules lawyer. She has been doing this for 7 years. She knows every loophole and every technicality. You are going to drive yourself crazy trying to beat her at her own game. So what do? You ignore her. You live your life. You let her waste her time on petty complaints. Eventually she will get bored and move on to someone else. I wanted to believe that, but I had a feeling Deborah was not the type to get bored. She was the type to escalate. I was right. Monday morning, I got a certified letter from the Riverside Meadows HOA. It was a formal notice of violation, citing me for operating a commercial business from a residential property, maintaining a nuisance that interfered with the quiet enjoyment of the neighborhood, and creating a safety hazard by storing combustible materials in an unapproved location. I was being fined $500 and given 15 days to remove all firewood from the property and cease all business operations. I read the letter 3 times, my blood pressure rising with each pass. This was insane. Officer Patterson had already confirmed that I was not violating any laws. The firewood was for personal use, neatly stacked, and no different from hundreds of other homes that kept firewood for their fireplaces. And the claim about business operations was completely fabricated. I called the number listed on the letter and got the HOA management company, a place called Premier Community Management. A bored-sounding receptionist transferred me to the account manager for Riverside Meadows, a woman named Carol. Hi, this is Wesley Forester. I just received a violation notice that is completely inaccurate and I need to dispute it. Carol sighed, the sound of someone who dealt with these calls all day. Okay, let me pull up your account. What is the violation number? I read it off to her. All right, I see it here. Commercial business operations and unsafe firewood storage. What is your dispute? Everything. I do not run a business from my home. I own a forestry company that operates from a commercial facility. The firewood is for personal use, legally delivered and stored safely. I even had a police officer confirm all of this on site. Do you have documentation of the police interaction? I can get it. The officer's name was Patterson with Cedar Rapids PD. Okay, you will need to submit a written dispute with any supporting documentation within 7 days. The HOA board will review it at their next meeting and make a determination. And what if they uphold the violation? Then you would need to comply with the notice or face additional fines and potential legal action. This is ridiculous. They are targeting me for no legitimate reason. Carol's voice softened slightly. Look, off the record. I have worked with Riverside Meadows for 4 years. Deborah Winters submits more violation reports than the rest of my 50 communities combined. Most of them are borderline at best. But she is the HOA president, and we are contracted to process whatever the board submits. Your best bet is to document everything, submit a formal dispute, and show up to the board meeting to defend yourself. When is the next board meeting? 2 weeks from Thursday. 7 p.m. at the community center. I thanked her and hung up, then immediately called my business attorney, a sharp woman named Patricia who had helped me set up my LLC. I explained the situation and emailed her the violation notice. She called me back an hour later. "Wesley, this is harassment. They have no grounds for any of this. You are not violating any zoning laws, any city ordinances, or any legitimate HOA regulations. The firewood storage claim is particularly absurd since Iowa has no restrictions on personal firewood storage as long as it is not creating an actual hazard." So what do? We send them a response outlining exactly why their violation notice is baseless, threaten a lawsuit for harassment if they continue, and dare them to try enforcing it. If they push forward, we actually file suit. You would have a strong case for damages, especially if we can establish a pattern of targeted harassment. That sounds expensive. It could be. But if they are going to abuse their authority, someone needs to push back. Otherwise, they will just keep doing this to everyone in the neighborhood. She was right. This was not just about me anymore. If Deborah could fabricate violations against me, she could do it to anyone. Patricia drafted a response letter that was simultaneously professional and scathing. It outlined my business operations, provided copies of all my licenses and permits, referenced the police report from Officer Patterson, and cited multiple Iowa property law statutes that the HOA's actions violated. It concluded with a clear statement that any further harassment or unfounded violations would result in legal action. We sent it certified mail that afternoon. The next 2 weeks were tense. I kept expecting Deborah to show up with some new complaint, but she stayed away. I saw her driving through the neighborhood in her white Lexus sedan, slowly patrolling like a security guard, but she did not stop at my house. Gary Chen told me she had been going door to door, talking to neighbors about me. She was apparently spinning a story about how I was running an illegal logging operation, storing dangerous equipment, and bringing down property values. Most people were not buying it, but a few of the older residents who had lived there since the subdivision was built seemed concerned. The Thursday of the HOA board meeting, I put on actual business casual clothes instead of my usual jeans and flannel, printed out a full portfolio of documentation, and drove to the community center with Patricia. Tessa wanted to come for moral support, but she had gotten called in for an emergency surgery. The Riverside Meadows Community Center was a bland brick building that looked like it had been built in the 80s and never updated. The meeting room had those uncomfortable plastic chairs and fluorescent lighting that made everyone look vaguely ill. About 20 residents were already seated when we arrived. Deborah sat at a folding table at the front of the room with her board members, Martha Keegan and Susan Delacroix, plus 2 others I did not recognize. She looked up when I walked in, and her expression hardened. The meeting started with standard HOA business, budget reports, landscaping contracts, pool maintenance schedules. I sat through 45 minutes of mind-numbing procedural discussion before they finally got to violation hearings. "Next item," Deborah said, her voice taking on a formal tone. "Violation notice for 2847 Maple Street, property owner Wesley Forester. Mr. Forester was cited for operating a commercial business from a residential property, creating a nuisance and unsafe storage of combustible materials." I stood up. "I am here to dispute those charges." Deborah's smile was thin. "You may address the board when recognized. Please wait your turn." Patricia stood up next to me. For the record, I am Patricia Lowell, legal counsel for Mr. Forester. We submitted a comprehensive written response to these allegations. Has the board reviewed that response? One of the board members I did not recognize, an older man with glasses, shifted uncomfortably. We received a letter from your office, yes. And Deborah cut in. The board has reviewed Mr. Forester's claims and finds them insufficient to dismiss the violations. The evidence clearly shows commercial activity occurring at a residential address. What evidence? I asked, unable to keep quiet. You will be recognized when it is your turn to speak, Deborah snapped. Patricia put a hand on my arm. Mrs. Winters, with all due respect, you cannot hold a hearing without allowing the accused party to present their defense. That is a violation of basic due process. This is not a court of law, Miss Lowell. This is an HOA board meeting. And HOA boards are still bound by principles of fairness and basic procedure. If you deny Mr. Forester the right to defend himself, any ruling you make will be invalid and subject to legal challenge. The other board members were looking increasingly uncomfortable. The older man with glasses spoke up. Deborah, maybe we should hear what Mr. Forester has to say. She looked like she wanted to argue, but she was outnumbered. Fine. Mr. Forester, you may present your defense. I stood up and walked to the front of the room, setting my portfolio on the table. Thank you. First, I want to be clear about what actually happened. I own and operate Forester Forestry and Land Management, a fully licensed forestry business. The company operates entirely from a commercial facility at 1847 Industrial Park Road. I have copies of my business license, my commercial lease, my Iowa Department of Natural Resources permits, and my liability insurance documentation right here. I passed the copies to each board member. Deborah barely glanced at them. My home at 2847 Maple Street is my residence. I do not conduct any business operations there. No customers come to the property. No equipment is stored there. No inventory is maintained there. On the morning of Saturday, November 2nd, I had a personal firewood delivery made to my home. The delivery was made by my employee in a company truck because I ordered the wood from my own inventory. This is no different than if I owned a furniture store and had a couch delivered to my house. Martha Keegan spoke up. But you had a commercial truck parked on a residential street. The truck was not parked. It was making a delivery. The delivery took less than an hour and the truck left. Multiple residents on this street have received deliveries from commercial vehicles. The Simmons family had landscaping materials delivered last month. The Harrisons had a piano moved in September. Both involved commercial vehicles. Why was my delivery different? Nobody had an answer for that. Second, regarding the claim of unsafe combustible material storage. The firewood is seasoned oak, kiln-dried, stacked neatly against my garage in accordance with all fire safety standards. There are no Iowa or Cedar Rapids city codes that restrict personal firewood storage. The fire marshal was not consulted before this violation was issued, which suggests the board has no actual evidence of a safety hazard. Susan Delacroix jumped in. Common sense tells us that a large amount of wood is a fire risk. By that logic, every wooden deck, fence, or shed in this neighborhood is a fire risk. The amount of firewood I have is less than 1 standard cord, which is typical for a household that uses a fireplace regularly. Unless you are planning to cite everyone in the neighborhood who has firewood, this is selective enforcement. Deborah finally looked up from her papers. The issue, Mr. Forester, is that you are blurring the lines between commercial and residential use of your property. You had a company vehicle with your business name and logo on it parked in front of your house. You are storing inventory from your business at your home. This creates the appearance of commercial activity, which is prohibited. It creates the appearance of me receiving a delivery. And it is not inventory. It is personal property that I purchased for my own use. If I bought a car from a dealership I owned, would that car be inventory or personal property? That is not the same thing. It is exactly the same thing. Patricia stepped forward. Mrs. Winters, the bottom line is that you cannot prove Mr. Forester has conducted any business activity at his residence because no such activity has occurred. You are attempting to penalize him for owning a business while also being a homeowner. That is discriminatory and legally indefensible. We are not discriminating against anyone. We are enforcing our community standards equally. Then, why is Mr. Forester the only resident being cited for receiving commercial deliveries? Why is he the only one being cited for storing materials at his home? Can you provide examples of other residents being held to the same standard? The silence was damning. Deborah opened her mouth, closed it, and looked at her fellow board members for support. None of them seemed willing to back her up. The older man with glasses cleared his throat. Perhaps we should table this matter and do additional research into the specific code violations alleged. We do not need more research, Deborah said. The violations are clear. Deborah, if we are going to fine someone $500, we need to be absolutely certain we have grounds to do so. Miss Lowell has raised valid points about selective enforcement and due process. I move that we postpone a decision on this matter until next month's meeting. One of the other board members, a woman in her 60s I did not recognize, seconded the motion. All in favor? The older man asked. 3 hands went up, including his own. Opposed? Deborah and Martha raised their hands. Motion carries. Mr. Forester, your violation hearing is postponed until next month's meeting. The board will conduct additional review of the relevant codes and regulations. Deborah looked furious, but she could not do anything about it. The meeting moved on to other business and Patricia and I left. In the parking lot, she turned to me. That went better than expected. The board is clearly split. Deborah is pushing this, but the others are not fully on board. So what happens now? They will do their research, realize they have no legitimate grounds for the violations and quietly drop the matter. Or Deborah will double down, push for a vote anyway and lose. Either way, I think you are in the clear. And if she does not let it go, then we file a lawsuit for harassment and abuse of authority. But my guess is the other board members will rein her in. Nobody wants the HOA to get sued. I drove home feeling cautiously optimistic. Maybe this was finally over. I should have known better. 2 days later, I got a call from the Cedar Rapids Building and Zoning Department. There had been an anonymous complaint filed against my property, claiming I was operating an unpermitted commercial business. An inspector would be coming out to investigate. I called Patricia immediately. They are escalating. Who is they? Deborah, it has to be. Anonymous complaint to the city right after the HOA meeting. She is trying to get the city to do her dirty work. Patricia cursed under her breath. Okay, do not panic. You have all your business documentation in order. Your company does not operate from your home. Just cooperate with the inspector, show them everything is legitimate, and this will blow over. The inspector, a tired-looking man named Ron, showed up the next afternoon. He walked around my property with a clipboard making notes. I showed him my business licenses, explained where my actual business was located, and demonstrated that there was no commercial activity happening at my residence. You store any business equipment here? He asked. No. Everything is at the commercial facility. Do you meet with clients here? No. All client meetings happen either at their properties or at my office. Do you maintain any inventory here? Just personal firewood for my fireplace. Ron made more notes. Okay, I am not seeing any evidence of commercial operations at this address. The complaint mentioned commercial vehicles. Do you park business vehicles here? Occasionally, I park my work truck in the driveway, but it is registered to the business and I use it for commuting. That is legal under zoning regulations. Do you work on the vehicle here? Maintenance, repairs, that kind of thing? No. We have a mechanic who handles that at the business location. He nodded. All right, I have seen enough. I will file a report saying there is no zoning violation. If the complaint came from a neighbor dispute, you might want to try to resolve that directly. Believe me, I am trying. After Ron left, I sat on my porch and tried to figure out what to do next. Deborah clearly was not going to stop. She was going to keep filing complaints, keep trying to find some angle to use against me. And every time I had to deal with an inspector or a police officer or a lawyer, it cost me time and money and peace of mind. Gary Chen came over that evening with a proposition. I talked to some of the neighbors. About 15 of us are sick of Deborah and her power trips. We want to put together an opposition slate for the next HOA election. If we can get enough people to vote, we can remove her as president and elect someone reasonable. When is the election? 3 months. We need to file paperwork to get on the ballot by the end of this month. And you want me to run? I want us all to run. A whole slate. President, vice president, treasurer, the whole board. Replace the current administration completely. Gary, I have been here less than a year. I have been in an open war with Deborah for months. I am the most controversial person in the neighborhood right now. If I run, it will just galvanize her supporters. You are controversial because she made you controversial, but everyone who has actually talked to you knows you are reasonable. And more importantly, you are the only one willing to actually fight back against her. The rest of us have just been trying to avoid her. I do not know if I am the right person for this. You are exactly the right person. You are organized, you are smart, and you are not afraid of her. That is what we need. I told him I would think about it. That night I talked it over with Tessa. If you run for HOA president, it is going to take up a lot of time, she said. You are already working 60-hour weeks with the business. I know, but what is the alternative? Let Deborah keep harassing me. Keep spending money on lawyers every time she files a bogus complaint. You could move. I like this house. I like this neighborhood. I should not have to move because one person is on a power trip. She was quiet for a moment. You are going to do this no matter what I say, are not you? Probably. She kissed me. Then I am with you. Just do not let it consume your life. This house and this neighborhood are not worth destroying yourself over. The next morning, I called Gary and told him I was in. We spent the next week organizing. Gary would run for president. I would run for vice president, and we recruited 3 others for the remaining board positions. A retired teacher named Linda Morrison for treasurer, a software engineer named Ahmed Patel for secretary, and a nurse named Jennifer Kwan for member-at-large. We filed our paperwork with the HOA management company and started campaigning, which mostly meant going door to door and talking to neighbors. The reception was mixed. About half the people we talked to were enthusiastic about the idea of new leadership. They had their own stories of petty violations and unfair fines. One family had been cited for having their garbage cans visible from the street for 2 hours after trash pickup because they were at work and could not move them immediately. Another had been fined because their teenage son's car was parked on the street overnight, violating the rule about no vehicles parked on streets between midnight and 6 a.m., even though there was literally nowhere else for the kid to park because their driveway was full. but the other half were either apathetic or actively supportive of Deborah. They liked the strict enforcement. They thought it kept property values up and maintained standards. Some of them looked at me with suspicion, having heard Deborah's version of events where I was some kind of reckless business owner endangering the neighborhood. One older woman, Mrs. Callahan, actually lectured me on her doorstep about responsibility and following rules. "In my day, people respected authority," she said. "They did not just do whatever they wanted and expect everyone else to deal with it. Mrs. Callahan, with respect, I am not doing whatever I want. I am following all the rules. I am following city codes, state laws, and reasonable HOA guidelines. What I am not doing is letting someone abuse their authority to harass me. Deborah is a good woman who works hard to keep this neighborhood nice. Maybe if you cooperated instead of fighting her, you would not have these problems." There was no point arguing with her. Some people would always side with authority, no matter how unreasonably that authority was being used. The month leading up to the election was brutal. Deborah launched her own campaign, sending out flyers that painted our slate as troublemakers who wanted to eliminate all standards and turn Riverside Meadows into a chaotic free-for-all. She held a town hall where she presented charts showing how property values had increased during her tenure as president, implying that voting her out would crash the housing market. She also ramped up her complaints against me. I got cited for my grass being too long, even though I had mowed it 3 days earlier and it was well within the height limits. I got cited for having holiday decorations up too early, even though it was December 1st and half the neighborhood had decorations up. I got cited for having a package sitting on my porch for 4 hours, which apparently violated some obscure rule about maintaining curb appeal. Each violation came with a $50 to $100 fine. I disputed every single one, which meant more paperwork, more time, more stress. Patricia was earning her retainer. The election was scheduled for the first Tuesday in January, held at the community center. Voting would be open from 3 p.m. to 8 p.m., and the votes would be counted immediately afterward. I spent the day nervously working, unable to focus on anything. Miguel kept asking if I was okay because I kept zoning out in the middle of conversations. At 7 p.m., I left the office and drove to the community center. Tessa met me there, having gotten off shift early to vote and show support. The parking lot was surprisingly full. Gary said that was a good sign because high turnout usually favored challengers. Inside, there was a table set up where residents checked in and received ballots. Deborah was there, playing the role of gracious incumbent, greeting everyone and thanking them for participating in the democratic process. When she saw me, her smile turned icy. Tessa and I voted, dropped our ballots in the box, and went to wait in the main room with the other residents. Gary was there with his wife, looking nervous. Linda Morrison was calmly reading a book. Ahmed and Jennifer were chatting with some neighbors. At 8 p.m. sharp, the polls closed and the ballot box was brought to the front. Deborah and one of her board members, plus 2 neutral residents who had volunteered as observers, began counting votes. There were 147 ballots cast out of 206 eligible households. The count took about 40 minutes. Finally, one of the observers stood up to announce the results. For HOA President, Gary Chen, 80 votes. Deborah Winters, 67 votes. Gary Chen is the new president. The room erupted in a mix of cheers and shocked silence. Deborah's face went white, then red. She stood up abruptly, knocking over her chair. The observer continued reading results. Our entire slate had won, with margins ranging from 10 to 20 votes. We had completely swept the board. Gary stood up and walked to the front, extending his hand to Deborah. "Thank you for your years of service to the community. She ignored his hand. "This is a mistake. This neighborhood is going to fall apart without proper leadership. Do not come crying to me when property values plummet and everything turns to chaos." "I am sure we will manage," Gary said calmly. Deborah grabbed her purse and stormed out, Martha and Susan trailing behind her. The remaining residents who had supported her looked stunned, not quite sure what to do. Gary addressed the room. "Thank you all for voting and for trusting us with the leadership of this community. Our first priority is to review all current policies and make sure they are fair, enforceable, and actually serving the interests of homeowners rather than just creating hassles. We will be scheduling a community input session next month to get feedback on what you all want to see changed. This HOA should work for you, not against you." There was applause. Tessa hugged me. Gary shook my hand, grinning. "We did it, man. You did it. You ran for president. We all did it. This was a team effort." The next few weeks were a whirlwind of transition. The old board was required to hand over all HOA records, which they did with extreme reluctance. Deborah tried to claim that certain documents were privileged or under legal review, but the HOA bylaws were clear that all records belonged to the association, not to individual board members. When we finally got access to the full records, we found some disturbing patterns. Deborah had been selectively enforcing rules for years. People she liked got warnings. People she did not like got fines immediately. Some residents had been fined hundreds of dollars for violations that other residents committed without consequences. Even worse, we found that she had been pocketing some of the fine money. Not a lot, but enough to notice when we did a careful audit. She had set up a system where fines were supposed to be paid to the HOA management company, but she had been directing some residents to pay her directly by check. Those checks had been deposited into her personal account, not the HOA account. This was embezzlement. Gary called an emergency board meeting, and we contacted both the HOA attorney and local police. We were looking at about $8,000 that had gone missing over 3 years. The investigation took 2 months. During that time, Deborah hired a lawyer and tried to claim the money was for administrative expenses that she had covered personally. But there was no documentation of any such expenses, and the HOA budget had separate line items for all administrative costs. In March, Deborah Winters was arrested and charged with embezzlement and theft by deception. The charges were Class D felonies in Iowa, carrying potential prison time. She also faced civil liability to repay the stolen funds plus damages. Her mugshot made the local news. The headline read, "Former HOA President Arrested for Embezzling Homeowner Funds." The story detailed her years of strict enforcement, and the irony that the person who had been so obsessed with rules had been breaking them herself. She ended up taking a plea deal. 3 years probation, full restitution to the HOA, 1,000 hours of community service, and a permanent ban from serving on any HOA board in Iowa. She avoided jail time, but her reputation was destroyed. The new board got to work reforming the HOA policies. We eliminated about half the petty rules that served no purpose, except to give the board power to harass people. We established clear, objective standards for violations so enforcement would be consistent. We created an appeals process that was actually fair. And we drastically reduced fines while increasing warning periods. The most controversial change we made was eliminating the rule against commercial vehicles in driveways. The old rule had been vague and selectively enforced. The new rule simply said that vehicles had to be legally registered, in good working condition, and not blocking sidewalks or streets. If someone wanted to park their work truck in their driveway, that was fine. If someone wanted to park a commercial van, that was fine. As long as it was not an eyesore or creating actual problems, we did not care. Property values did not plummet. The neighborhood did not descend into chaos. If anything, things got better. People were friendlier, more willing to actually talk to their neighbors instead of filing anonymous complaints. The annual HOA meeting had the highest attendance in years because people actually wanted to participate instead of avoiding the drama. I kept running my forestry business, which continued to grow. We landed a major contract with the county to manage their park system woodlots, which meant hiring 2 more employees and upgrading our equipment. My work truck was parked in my driveway most nights, and nobody complained. Tessa and I got engaged that summer. We were sitting on the back deck, grilling dinner and watching the sunset when she said, "Remember when you thought moving to a place with an HOA would be boring and drama-free? That was naive of me. That was adorable of you. You really thought suburban life would be quiet. Well, it is now. It is now because you fought back. Most people would have just moved or given up. I am too stubborn to do either of those things." She kissed me. "I know. That is why I am marrying you." Gary served 2 years as HOA president before stepping down and handing the role to Linda Morrison. I stayed on as vice president, mostly handling communications and keeping an eye on the budget. It was not exciting work, but it was satisfying to know that the HOA was actually serving the community instead of terrorizing it. Deborah moved out of Riverside Meadows about a year after her arrest. I heard she went to live with her sister in Des Moines. I saw her one last time on a Saturday morning when she came back to pack up the last of her things. She drove past my house in a rental truck, and our eyes met for just a moment. She looked older, tired, defeated. I did not feel triumphant. I just felt sad that it had come to this. But mostly I felt relieved. The war was over. I had won, not through being petty or vindictive, but by standing up for what was right and refusing to be bullied. My firewood was stacked neatly against my garage. My work truck sat in my driveway. My business thrived. And my home was actually a home, not a battlefield. On quiet evenings, I would sit on my porch with a beer and watch the neighborhood go about its business. Kids riding bikes, families walking dogs, people tending their gardens. Normal, peaceful suburban life. And I would think about how close I came to giving up and moving away, to letting Deborah drive me out. How many other people had she driven away over the years? How many people had paid her bogus fines and suffered her petty tyranny because they did not have the resources or the will to fight back? The forestry business taught me a lot about managing ecosystems, about knowing when to cut and when to let things grow. Communities were not that different. Sometimes you had to remove something harmful to let the rest of the system thrive. Deborah had been a blight on Riverside Meadows, choking out any chance for community and trust. Once she was gone, the neighborhood could finally grow into what it was supposed to be. Tessa would laugh at me when I got philosophical like this. "You are overthinking it," she would say. "You just did not want to let some random lady tell you what to do." She was not wrong. I had never been good at taking orders from people who did not deserve the authority they had, but it was more than that. It was about standing up not just for myself, but for everyone who could not or would not stand up for themselves. It was about making sure that the rules actually made sense and served a purpose, rather than just existing to give someone power over other people. The months rolled into years. My business expanded beyond eastern Iowa, taking contracts across the Midwest. Miguel became a full partner in the operation. We hired a dozen employees. The little one-man operation I had started with a beat-up pickup truck turned into something real and substantial. Tessa and I got married at a vineyard outside of Cedar Rapids. Gary and his wife came. Ahmed and Jennifer came. Half the neighborhood came, actually. It was a good day. We bought out the house next door when it went up for sale and combined the properties, giving us a huge backyard and plenty of room to eventually raise kids. I built a proper firewood shed, oversized and way more elaborate than necessary, mostly because I could and because I wanted to. I kept it stocked with seasoned oak and hickory, enough to heat the house all winter and then some. Every time I looked at that woodshed, I thought about Deborah calling the cops over a firewood delivery. How something so simple and innocent had turned into months of conflict and stress. How her need to control everything had ultimately destroyed her. There was a lesson in that, I thought. You could spend your whole life trying to control things that were not yours to control, trying to force the world to match your vision of how it should be. And all you would accomplish is making yourself and everyone around you miserable. Or you could let go, trust people to handle their own business, and focus on making your own corner of the world as good as it could be. I chose the latter. The new HOA board chose the latter, and Riverside Meadows was better for it. On a cold evening in December, 3 years after the whole mess started, I was out splitting wood in my driveway when a car pulled up. A young couple got out, looking around the neighborhood with the expression of people who were house hunting. "Excuse me," the woman called. "Do you live here?" "I do. Can I ask you about the neighborhood? We are thinking about putting an offer on the house 2 streets over. Sure, it is a good place. Good neighbors, nice and quiet." "How is the HOA? The real estate agent said there was some drama a few years ago, but it is all settled now." I smiled. "The HOA is fine. We have good leadership, reasonable rules, and nobody is going to call the cops on your firewood delivery." She laughed, thinking I was joking. "That is specific. Long story. But the short version is that we got rid of the people who were causing problems and replaced them with folks who actually care about the community. You will be fine here." They thanked me and drove off. I went back to splitting wood, feeling the satisfying thunk of the maul biting into oak, feeling the burn in my shoulders and back. Honest work. Simple work. My phone rang. It was a client out near Davenport who needed 100 acres of timber assessed. I told him I would be out there Monday morning. Business was good. Tessa pulled into the driveway, home from her shift. She got out of her car and stood watching me for a moment. "You really love splitting wood, do not you?" she said. "It is therapeutic. Or you are still working out your anger over the whole HOA thing?" "Maybe both." She came over and kissed me, heedless of the sweat and wood chips. "Come inside when you are done being manly and primitive. I am making dinner. Give me 20 minutes. I finished the pile I had started, stacked the split wood neatly, and put away my tools. The sun was setting, painting the sky orange and pink. Smoke rose from chimneys up and down the street. Winter was settling in, and people were burning through their firewood supplies. In the spring, I would get calls from a dozen neighbors wanting deliveries. And I would send Miguel around with the truck, and nobody would call the cops, and it would all be perfectly normal and boring. Boring was good. Boring was peaceful. I had fought for boring, and I had won. I went inside, washed up, and sat down to dinner with the woman I loved in the home I had defended. Outside, the neighborhood carried on in comfortable, orderly normalcy. The HOA existed, but it existed to serve rather than to control. Rules were followed because they made sense, not because someone would fine you if you stepped out of line. It had taken a year of stress and conflict and legal bills to get to this point. It had taken standing up to someone who was used to everyone backing down. It had taken documenting everything, building a coalition, and fundamentally changing the power structure of a small suburban community. But it had been worth it. Sometimes the fight is worth it. Sometimes you cannot just walk away or let things slide. Sometimes you have to plant your feet and say no, this far and no further. Not because you want conflict, but because the alternative is surrendering to unreasonable authority and living under someone else's arbitrary rules. I had been ready to compromise, ready to find middle ground, ready to coexist peacefully. But Deborah had not wanted peace. She had wanted submission. And when someone demands submission, the only response is defiance. So I had defied her, and I had won, and the community was better for it. That was the story I would tell someday, when people asked about the HOA drama that had made the local news. I would tell them about Deborah calling the cops on a firewood delivery. I would tell them about Officer Patterson confirming that I ran a licensed forestry business. I would tell them about the election and the investigation and the criminal charges. But mostly, I would tell them about what came after, about a community learning to govern itself reasonably, about neighbors trusting each other instead of reporting each other, about turning a homeowners association from an instrument of control into an actual association of homeowners working together, because that was the real story. Not the conflict, but the resolution. Not the fight, but what we built after the fight was over. I finished dinner and helped Tessa with the dishes. We settled onto the couch to watch a movie, her feet in my lap, my hands absently rubbing her ankles. It was a perfect, ordinary evening. The kind of evening that Deborah would have ruined with some new complaint or violation notice if she were still in power. But she was not in power anymore. Nobody was, really. The HOA existed to serve basic functions like maintaining common areas and organizing neighborhood events. It did not exist to micromanage people's lives or enforce petty aesthetic standards. It had been transformed from a weapon into a tool, and that transformation had made all the difference. Outside, the night settled over Riverside Meadows. Lights glowed in windows. Cars pulled into driveways. People lived their lives without fear of arbitrary punishment or harassment. It was everything a neighborhood should be and so rarely was. And in my shed, neatly stacked and properly seasoned, was enough firewood to last the winter. Delivered by my own company, in my own truck, to my own home. Legal, legitimate, and completely unremarkable, just the way it should be.